Yesterday, the Department of Education announced they were investigating 5 states for potential civil rights violations over the banning of in-school mask mandates. According to reports, the department sent letters to school officials in Iowa, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah, notifying them of formal investigations into whether state mask mandate restrictions prevent students with disabilities from, quote, safely returning to in-person education in violation of federal law, unquote. Joining us now to discuss is Rachel Bovard, Policy Director at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Rachel, welcome to the show. So it's interesting because 2 sides are saying this is a civil rights violation, right? So you've got one side saying, no, civil rights violation to force me to wear a mask. Then you have others saying, apparently, it's a civil rights violation to not mandate masks. Which one do you think is in violation of civil rights?
I personally don't think anything here is a civil rights violation. I think we also have to be very clear about what's going on in these states, which is that anyone who wants to wear a mask in these places can. No one is preventing the wearing of masks. And that seems to be sort of at issue with a lot of the reporting. It doesn't mention that fact, which I think is very important. This is simply about choice. I don't think that this is worthy of any kind of investigation. I think this is sort of overt politicking, taking COVID to these political ends that we've seen. And I hope that they kind of back off. I don't think there's anything to find here. If you have a choice to wear a mask and you choose to, that's great. Why don't we let people exercise their personal freedom with regard to this?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, but why not? And this is the obvious kind of liberal response, but why not allow people to elect people to the school board and allow the school boards to set their own policies? At what point did that become problematic for the right?
I think it's a fair critique because I do think the right for a long time has said, look, we do need to have local decision making and local control. I think the concern being reflected from a lot of sort of red state governors is that there are people that are using this not actually to respond to claims of, science and public health, but to just exert this sort of power grab that, if you mask wearing and mask mandates have become symptomatic with virtue, right? If you have one, you're holy and better than everyone else. And I think that's what they're trying to get at. But, you're not wrong. Right. The right has always had this emphasis on local control. And I think we'd like to get back to that. But I think you have to get past this, ability or push to use, COVID masks and all these things as a symptom of, somehow being a power grab or being better than everyone else. And I think that's what they're responding to.
So a study by the CDC on COVID transmission in American schools found that masking unvaccinated teachers and improving ventilation were associated with lower COVID rates in schools. However, distancing, hybrid learning, classroom barriers, and mask requirements were not statistically beneficial. And according to the Wall Street Journal, masking children all day may be more harmful to children with disabilities. Rachel, I'd love your thoughts on this because this has been right, left, and center. A point that many parents, especially I've seen make, is masking does have adverse effects on children. Is there whether it's ability to read emotion, it can put them behind in terms of developing speech, et cetera. Are there other alternatives? Is this getting taken into consideration in the policy making? What are your thoughts?
Well, this kind of gets back to the point I was trying, that I was making in response to Ryan, which is that I think a lot of people are ignoring what is pretty clear science at the end of the day that shows that masking kids doesn't really have any benefit in preventing COVID. And also we know that, kids don't, it's very rare for healthy kids to die of COVID. Kids can get it, but they don't suffer like adults do. Children are not mini adults. Right. But we insist on treating them that way with regard to masking. And every other country in the world has seemed to come to this conclusion. You have countries from the UK to Italy to all of Scandinavia to France saying we are not going to mask children in schools because there's no evidence that we need to do so. So why are we seeing these insane mask mandates, especially, as the New York Mag piece pointed out? It's harmful to kids who actually do need to see facial expressions, and especially kids with speech disabilities and articulation delays. It's very important for them to see, not only expressions, but how words are pronounced and, phonetic, how your mouth moves around, words. This is very, very important. And so this whole, I think, scenario around masking kids in schools is much more about the adults in question than what's best for the kids. And I think that's that's going to have ripple effects that are going to really impact not only disabled kids, poor kids, all kids that are subject to this.
It does seem
fighting words, Rachel. Fighting words when it comes to saying masks. Because that's a big hot point. You're right to say, well, masks maybe don't really work.
They don't work for kids.
I mean, it seems like we've lost the ability to kind of dispassionately analyze it in this country. Maybe Italy and Switzerland and places like that can actually look at the science and come to a conclusion on it. But here, nobody on the left is going to trust anybody on the right's reading of the science because it's been instrumental, all the way through. And people on the right can point to all sorts of times that Fauci has made one claim for a particular reason when the science said something different, and he was actually trying to just say, for example, get people not to hoard masks. So he said that masks don't actually work in the spring of 2020. And then later it's like, well, masks do work. I just didn't want you to wear them so that you didn't hoard them all from first responders. And so we really don't have the capacity anymore as a society to kind of just sit down and look at the science and say, well, here's what it says about how masking ought to be done. And so then you have some school districts where even at recess the kids are wearing masks, and in other school districts, even where they're packed into one room together and all of them are unvaccinated, none of them are wearing masks. And it's true that some can, but the peer pressure is going to push people away from that, and we have to understand the social science of schools too.
I'm curious if, with all this masking, I'm curious if, influenza is way deadlier for kids than COVID. Right now, I know in the news they're saying, 2,000 kids are in the hospital, but each year we have upwards of 25,000 kids in the hospital with influenza. So I'm curious if with masking, some schools or some, there's going to be definitely schools and areas that do have mask mandates. I think we're seeing more of that than not. And so I'm curious if when influenza rates go down because of masking, with kids and snot-nosed little children like sneezing all over the place when that's going into a mask instead of all over desks, I'm curious if this will turn into it helped stop flu deaths and the spread of the flu, and so we need to do this every single year because influenza is deadlier than COVID. Do you think that's a possibility, Rachel, or am I just out there? I mean, we know I'm out there, but
I have no doubt that you will see this. And I think in some circumstances you actually already are. I think there was a school district in Florida that, may have just been punching back at DeSantis, but mandated masks not just for COVID, but also listed in the criteria for cold and flu. So I do think that we're going to see this, but I kind of think it goes back to the point Ryan was making too about not only have we lost the ability, I think, to dispassionately analyze the science in this case, but we've lost the ability to sort of measure any kind of risk tolerance, for anything. Because now, and you've seen this in COVID too, because at the beginning it was just about slowing the spread. And then it was about, not overwhelming hospitals and not dying. And now it's about no cases, right? So we've seemed to have this intolerance to illness at all. And if we can prevent any case of illness, then that becomes a matter of public health and a matter of public policy. And I think there's a lot of people saying, look, you can't live like that. You can't live in a world where there's no risk. That's just functionally impossible. And so how do you create a scenario where you're taking into account risk, but you're also allowing people to live their lives? And that's a balance that I don't think we've really found yet during COVID. And I think it's going to start to seep, as you point out, into other areas, other illnesses. And I really don't think that, that's a sustainable way to run a country, but, we'll see. I think it's just going to get more heated.
The rationale, the reason I don't think it'll ever catch on long term is that the rationale for it is not that it necessarily protects the kids who aren't going to die generally from COVID. It reduces the community spread, but just anecdotally on the question of whether masks work. I mean, when my kids first started going to daycare and then to school, I had gone 20 years without getting sick, and then all of a sudden, I spent the entire fall through spring with some type of a cold or other. And this year, with the kids in school wearing masks, was the first time I didn't get sick from the fall until the spring. So, and there was one kid who came into the classroom, with COVID, and none of the other kids caught it. They all had masks on. I don't know if it was the masks that did it, but something about the masks definitely kept my wife and I from getting sick for a whole year.
Well, and listen, I think the answer is kind of obvious, which is let the local school boards, let the local parents, the PTAs decide what's best for their school. If you're a community that's going through a major spike in COVID cases, then fine, mask up for a couple of months and then reassess. If you've had, very low community spread in your area, then let the parents make the decision, weigh their options, the risk that they see posed to their kids. But I mean, dictating things at the state level or the federal level is the worst thing you can do. This virus has been politicized from the outset, and we're never going to have an objective vantage point when we're coming from the state level or even the federal level. Let's do it locally and go from there. But Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. And next on Rising, Matt Stoller joins us to give his take on the withdrawal from Afghanistan.